Well, welcome back to Sailing Amélie, and this wee clip is just about a few boat projects that we've done to get ready for Cat 1. And here we are lifting Amélie out at Waikawa Marina back in January of this year. And over the course of this episode, I'll just talk you through a few of the projects since we bought the boat actually. So Waikawa did a bit of a repaint on the transom, just a bit of a touch-up on a couple of paint spots around the area. The usual scraping and sanding of the hull, and we put a barrier coat on too, coupled together with a couple of coats of anti-foul. And you'll see there around the sail drive and the rudder, we put a Trilux 33, which will prevent the corrosion there on the aluminium. Some new drogue chain plates that we installed. Here's a bit of a side view of Amélie, showing the new hydrovane, the drogue plates, the lifeline coming around the bow here, just showing off its newly polished exterior and newly underfouled bottom, which is looking quite fabulous on a beautiful day in Waikawa. Just give you a few seconds to enjoy that properly. Now here we are at Mana Marina on our first leg of our trip around the South Pacific, and just walking around the outside there on this video. We'll cover off what we did with the anchor hatch, some cover plates around there. We'll talk through the boom preventer setup I've got. We did a complete refit of all our standing rigging. I've replaced a number of the running rigging lines. We replaced the lifelines as they were sort of corroded and getting a little bit sort of questionable. We'll talk through a little bit about our hatch. So the companionway hatch, this is what it originally looked like. Bit of a canvas top, and I wasn't that happy with it as I kept sconing my head on the bit of aluminium ribbing that supported the canvas. So proceeded to build a strip planked fiberglass covered companionway cover, and here's the end result. It's a bit of a fun little project to do, and I think it turned out reasonably well. I now scald my head on the front edge of the companionway cover. Picture of the mast is me in Nelson Marina, just waiting rather pensively before we remove the mast. This is the first time I've ever done that. Proved to be very straightforward and very easy to do, and no particular issues at all, in part to do with the good condition of the mast and the interior of the boat. And a week or so later, popping her back in on a beautiful calm day in Nelson. And here she carrying on around the front of the boat. And at the front here, we've done a number of little projects here. That white cover is actually a cover to prevent the waves coming over and filling the anchor locker, which then tends to leak into the front of the boat. Here's a picture there of the anchor as we purchased it. It was quite heavily rusted. Spade anchors have a bit of a reputation for that. So I chopped out the rusty bits, welded on some new sections, had it hot dip galvanised, and poured in a whole heap more lead. And 4 or 5 years down the track, it's still looking good as new. Here's the interior of the anchor locker, the anchor hatch locker cover. It was rotten, the balsa core was rotten, so I stripped all that out and put foam in and re-fiberglassed all that and repainted it and put in a nice sticker showing the depths of the chain. Here's a bit of an example there of where we put the anchor on passage, so we can tuck it there inside the anchor locker, which is great. Carrying on around the boat. Here's our boom preventer setup. Runs through from the cockpit, one of the few lines that I run through from the cockpit, and then it runs back through a low friction fair lead which I've attached to the tow rail there with some Dyneema loops. And that runs back to the stern, and a little bit more about that shortly. Moving now past the port lights, and no self-respecting refurbishment can avoid the fact that you'll have to rebed your port lights at some stage. And fortunately I only had to do one side, although a messy job with a lot of silicone to clear up, which was a bit frustrating. But that's all good. Now moving along towards the stern, you'll see here where I've clipped the loose end of the boom preventer line just down on the tow rail. And what I do there is just unclip it from there and then clip it onto this Dyneema leash, which I run from the rear of the boom all the way to the forward end, just held in place by that bungee which you saw before. And that provides a maximum and best sort of mechanical advantage for acting as a boom preventer. Moving back around the transom, you will see there our new hydrovane. We were finally realised that we had to do something after our passage down to Christchurch, and the Ray Marine autopilot control head failed, and we had to hand steer it a good chunk of the way. So as we're shorthanding around the South Pacific, we wanted to be sure there that we had a little bit of a better backup. So here's our hydrovane, brand new, installed, some pretty meaty backing blocks that have gone into place, and it proves to be very successful and tracks the boat very nicely, so we're very pleased with that. And here's the major project 12 months ago, was rebuilding the stern arch, and the reason why we wanted to do that was a couple of things: just tidying the general arrangement up, removing all the loose cabling there that was draped all over the place and going through its own sort of cable glands into the hull. But most importantly there, I needed a little bit of extra solar, and that proved out to be the case when we went around the South Island and we were struggling to keep the batteries powered up. So here's a picture of it in its original state, and you'll see here with all the cables there that feed everywhere, and the cable holes themselves. So quite a job to rebuild. It was relatively easy to disassemble and patch everything up. Some engineering drawings there to work on a bit of a design. Had all the bits of 316 laser cut. Here's an initial bit of fabrication where the tube base plates go through a hole that penetrates the hull, and that's where all the cables are led down. Some nice packaged, tube there that I've had bent into shape, all ready to weld. And here's my welding setup. New to TIG welding, so took a couple of bottles of gas and quite a bit of scrap stainless steel to get sort of partially proficient. Quite a number of trips to and fro from the boat to set things up and get all the angles and that exactly right, and being aware there of the need to bolt into place and have jigs there to make sure we don't get too much distortion when we're welding. Back at Havelock Marina, did a lot of the site welding on those calm winter days and slowly fabricated up the structure itself. Quite a time-consuming mission, and did question myself and my sanity at times, but eventually there we managed to get there. So here's the starboard section in place. Down on the deck there's the central section that bolts in between the two. Here's the other, that's actually the starboard section. As we come across there, you'll see the port frame is mounted and in place. Beautiful winter's day in Havelock. What better way to spend the day? And there you'll see the port section all fitted up and ready to marry up with the starboard section and the central section. Here's an example of some of the detail. That's the bimini connection. Here's a bit of my rather amateurish welding. But no, we've made good progress, and it all came together remarkably. As you know, trying to get things all straight on a boat is quite problematic. Here's the lift for the outboard motor, and that's it, initial stages. There you see where the cables drop down through the tube. Here is the MPPT controllers. When I pulled the wind generator out, I found someone had drilled a drill bit through the old cable, but probably a little bit of a short going on at that some stage there, I'd imagine. And here's a bit of an overview of its final arrangement. And you'll see there I put in a bit of extra bracing and support. In the cockpit, we rebuilt the cockpit table out of Quila as just a bit of a test case to see how Quila would stand up to things. And typically with these very high oil hardwoods, the old varnish doesn't stick particularly marvellously, but it'll be fine. Down on the lazarette, there's a few bits of old plywood covers, which I pulled out and made up some new ones with some new marine grade plywood, fiberglassed and painted. Under the Dodger there, you'll see I've got the iPad mounted. In the cockpit lids would flex underneath me, so I pulled them apart, stripped them down and put a bit of foam in there and re-fiberglassed over, and that stiffened them up nicely, so it just feels a bit more substantive. And back to this shot, you'll see the iPad that I got mounted on the hard Dodger, which is a fantastic alternative or backup to the chart plotter. So that works very well, and quite pleased with that. And all the years that we've had it there, we've never had any issues necessarily with it, with reliability or it getting wet or problematic. So it isn't a waterproof case. Rebuilt the engine controls. There's a shot of the old one. And here's me just busy wiring it up and assembling that on once again, a bit of a plywood fiberglass covered board that I made up. There's the new ST8001 control head to replace the old 7001, where it's working very well off eBay. And that's pretty much it for upstairs. And that mount you see there's for the radar. And next video we'll have a few shots about the works that we've done down below. And these will include a bunch of things, including repowering, works on the water maker, navigation system, etc. So stay tuned and we'll have more for you next video.